Hello and welcome everybody to another installment of Conservation Conversations. I'm your host, Melissa Howes-Whitecross. And before we begin, I really would just like to extend my heartfelt thanks to all of you for the generous support we found last week. We had some incredible donations coming through after our Southern Ground Hornbill webinar, and we are really moved by the support that so many of you have shown us. And if you missed that Southern Ground Hornbill talk, as I said earlier, please do go and see it on YouTube. It is well worth a watch and a good uplifting video if you're feeling a bit down with lockdown. And just a quick reminder, you'll see on your screen that we are holding a raffle as BirdLife South Africa. It's called Jackpot Birding, and there is a prize of 100,000 Rand to the winner, so please consider going and having a look at that. You can find out more information on our BirdLife South Africa website. Now, tonight, we are extremely fortunate to have one of the lowveld legends joining us this evening. Duncan McKenzie is no stranger to birding and the birding world. He has extensive experience guiding and is also an ecological consultant for a private company, and he does consulting right through Africa. But obviously, South Africa's birds are home, and certainly one of his absolute favorite places to bird is Kruger National Park. So thank you, Duncan, for joining us. And we also have a guest joining us this evening, Herman van den Berg, who is a developer of the BirdPro app. And Herman will be giving a very short demonstration on the BirdPro app at the end of Duncan's presentation. So Duncan, thank you so much for joining us this evening, and Herman as well. If you wouldn't mind just telling us a little bit more about yourself while I get this video up and running, and then we'll take it from there.
Hi, folks. Fantastic to have everybody join us tonight to speak about the park. Melissa's asked me just to waffle on a bit, procrastinate while she gets everything fixed up. Here we go. Yeah, so we're a bunch of lowveld birders. We love the park, and tonight I'm representing our active club called BirdLife Lowveld. And just a big shout out to all my lowveld mates who are logged on tonight as well. So this is on behalf of the club. And yeah, folks, I hope that you enjoyed the talk tonight.
Thanks so much, Duncan. All right, everyone, here we go. Enjoy.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's presentation on the birds of the Kruger National Park. Now, like me, I'm sure many of you are longing to get back into the park to go birding and feel a little bit frustrated by the current lockdown situation. But I'm sure as soon as those gates reopen, many of us will be storming back in and driving our favorite roads and visiting our favorite areas again. Until then, we're going to have to rely on our photographs and our memories and our notebooks, and this presentation tonight will hopefully satisfy your longings and cravings to get back and look at birds again. So the Kruger National Park is internationally famous and renowned park. It's especially famous for sightings of mammals, large mammals, especially the big hairy scaries, but it probably doesn't get as much international recognition for being a really, really top birding spot. It's a park where a lot of different habitats are represented. The infrastructure is excellent. Access to most of the habitats is very good. And certainly it is a pleasure to walk around the camps and look at birds. But tonight we're not going to focus on Kruger's megastars, the mammalian megastars. We're going to focus on the birds. A group of birders got together from Mpumalanga and Limpopo and discussed the potential of collecting data throughout the park and then to see how valuable is the Kruger National Park for birds. So the Turning Kruger Green project was initiated, and when I say green, I mean green in terms of coverage on the Southern African Bird Atlas Project's coverage map, where green represents a minimum of 4 checklists submitted for every pentad. A pentad, for those of you who are not aware, is a spatial or mapping unit of about 7 or 8, maybe 9 kilometers by 9 kilometers. So the Kruger National Park covered, and adjacent lowveld covered over 440 of these pentads, and unfortunately not all of them had been accessed. So we decided to register the Turning Kruger Green project with Scientific Services, Sandpark Scientific Services, and in conjunction with various other role players, we got given a 3-year research permit to access all areas of the park, both in Mpumalanga and in Limpopo. So the project was initiated in 2013. This was the coverage at the time. As you can see, yellow and orange are the predominant colors apart from the gaps, and they represent less than 4 checklists submitted per mapping unit or per pentad. So what we had to do was get into all those pentads that were yellow or orange, and obviously get into the areas that had no data submitted at all. And for those pentads, we had to visit them 4 times in order to get the required number of checklists up. So we formed the Kruger Green team. This team consisted of 4 regular knowledgeable atlases, Peter Lawson, Joe Grosel, Ian White, and myself. And we led the sorties into the park with authority from Sandparks. The aim was to atlas every pentad in the Kruger at least 4 times. Most of the public access areas had already surpassed 4, so we really needed to get deep into the bush or off the tourist roads to get into those quite hard to reach places. Over time, we realized that the 4 of us were not going to cover everything, and we had to then get a few additional observers registered as well to assist with the fieldwork. Now, the aim of this project was to collect data on the avian distribution and reporting rates. This is now within a large protected area, and then collect data from just outside the park to allow for comparisons between them. And this will then hopefully assist us with the understanding of how important or not large conservation areas are for birds, and how much bird life changes or not outside of those protected areas. So this project was, in a sense, the control study for the birds of the lowveld, and it included data for many red data listed species. So we were mobilizing citizen scientists and collecting invaluable data on the distribution of many red data bird species. Our coverage stretched from approximately 31 degrees eastwards across to the Mozambique border, south to the Swazi border or Eswatini border, and then north up to the Zimbabwean border, crossing 2 provinces, crossing the entire Kruger National Park, and also the adjacent areas. The adjacent areas included some of the private game reserves, such as the Sabi Sands and Timavati, and also included large areas of rural housing developments. So we wanted data from those areas to compare with the data from within the Kruger itself. We did realize we had a large task on our hands, but especially with the project coordinator, Peter Lawson, we did lots of trips into the park, and annual progress was reasonably productive. In our first year, we managed to get to the easiest pentads. We managed to drop the number of acquired lists from 450 down to just over 300 in our first year, and also the number of pentads that we needed to visit. So there was a steady decrease from year 1 to year 2, and then quite a radical decrease from year 2 to year 3. Year 3 was quite difficult because it contained some very difficult to reach areas. Access was not always easy, and many of those pentads were actually quite difficult to bird. Once we got in there, it was often mid-morning, and any of you that have birded in the shrub Mapani veld in mid-morning in winter will know how hard it can be. So we did struggle to get those last ones done. In fact, some of the pentads were inaccessible from South Africa, and we actually had to drive through into Mozambique through the border post, all officially and legally mostly, and then come back through Mozambique to access some of the pentads that overlapped. That was a result of all our efforts. In 2013, you can see that the map is generally yellow or orange, indicating few checklists with large gaps. And then by 2016, our whole project area was at least green or better. So the pinks and the purples and the reds indicate even better effort, even better data, but we needed at least 4 lists per pentad, and we managed to do that. We managed to get the very, very last pentad done, and that was one of the ones that we had to go into Mozambique to access. So the data included, as I said, any birds that we saw as per the South African Bird Atlas Project 2 protocol. We need to spend a minimum of 2 hours within each of those pentads or mapping units. And we collected data on a lot of red data species, so species that are listed as threatened or near threatened by BirdLife South Africa, including, for example, hooded vulture, critically endangered, and as we heard last week from the excellent talk that Lucy gave, the southern ground hornbill as well. Let's just quickly add that the surveys were sponsored by BirdLife Lowveld, who was in turn also sponsored by a few companies. For example, SAPI gave us money to fund a lot of the fuel and accommodation within the park. So a lot of our expenses were covered. So what were the results? A report published for SANParks by Les Underhill, Peter Lawson, Michael Brooks, and Ashwell Glasson in early 2015 revealed some very interesting results. Many bird species showed either a large increase or a decrease in the median reporting rate in the quarter degree squares between SABAP 1 and SABAP 2. So we had to increase the pentads back up to quarter degree size. So a block of 9 pentads is equivalent in size. We had to do that because of SABAP 1, which was 35 or so years ago. That was the spatial reference used. So we had to just increase the area slightly over a time lapse of approximately 20 years. So we looked at data from SABAP 1, which was in the 90s, and compared it to the data we had collected now. Many species show striking increases and decreases, or decreases, that can be partly be ascribed to the development of thicket-type vegetation due to bush encroachment, or the clearing of natural vegetation. This would be outside the park. So there's a big difference of birds. When you hit the Kruger National Park fence and you go out of the fence into the rural areas, you're finding a different composition of species and a marked increase or decrease in some species compared to data from SABAP 1. So some of the results are showing on the screen now. You can see that bush encroachment within the Kruger Park has been significant on the larger birds. For example, secretary birds have decreased from 35 years ago to now, a reporting rate of 20% down to 0.4. Similar for southern ground hornbill and Kori bustard. It's a radical decrease in reporting rate from SABAP 1 days. And this is within a protected area. The Kruger National Park was protected 35 years ago. So nothing has changed in terms of their protection status, but these large terrestrial birds had decreased radically according to our research. Bush encroachment within Kruger caused an increase in reporting rate of what we would term generalist savanna species, such as long-billed crombec, yellow-breasted apalus, green-backed Cameroptera, white-browed scrub robin. Some of these birds almost doubled their reporting rate. If you look at green-backed Cameroptera, its reporting rate doubled in 35 to 40 years. Birds that are quite specialized, that like taller woodlands, such as greater bleared starling, Burchell starling, and burnt-necked aeromomelas, decreased between SABAP 1 and SABAP 2. There are less trees. They are being cut down, mostly for firewood, and there are less trees outside of Kruger than within. So birds such as burnt-necked aeromomela decreased from 54% reporting rate in SABAP 1 down to 6% in SABAP 2. So these aeromomelas are acacia specialists, and many of our acacias have got reasonably good firewood, so they are targeted. Other birds increased due to bush clearings. For example, pied crow increases from 13% up to 82% outside the Kruger National Park. Birds like scarlet-chested sunbird increased as well. So this is probably due to gardens, people's gardens. They're planting plants in the garden that are attracting the sunbird. So that's probably why they're increasing. We drew some incredible conclusions in the paper that was produced. And there is a radical change in the bird composition, reporting rate from the SABAP 1 to SABAP 2. Produced was also incorporated into a field guide for birds of the Kruger National Park that can still be found on the shelves, and increased, I think, quite significantly our knowledge of the birds of the Kruger National Park and the status and distribution of those birds that are considered threatened or near threatened. So turning Kruger green was a really good project. It wasn't always fun with anti-poaching activities that we had to dodge sometimes, getting stuck, dealing with antisocial elephants, but it was a really good project and we certainly learned a lot from it. Okay. Moving on, we now are going to go into our virtual birding tour of the Kruger National Park. So, as I mentioned earlier, Kruger is most famous for its large mammals. Certainly most of the tourists that come there that you see being driven around in the open safari vehicles, certainly many of them are coming to find the big game. But Kruger rightly can hold its own against most other parks in Africa at least, in terms of avian diversity, so the number of species. And many of the species of birds within Kruger are very approachable and they're very colorful. So they're much easier to see birds in Kruger than, for instance, in the forests of South America, where you have more species, but they're a lot more difficult to see. So birding is becoming more and more popular. There are more and more tourists coming to the park, coming to look at birds specifically. And of course, the big game and the scenery and all that is an added bonus for them. Bird photography is also on the increase, where these large cameras and lenses are being stuck out of windows and all that, photographing our birds. So why are there so many birds species within Kruger? It's an interesting question that I'm sometimes asked, and it's probably due to a number of different factors. Firstly is the situation within South Africa. So Kruger Park is in the far northeastern corner of South Africa, so it is fairly subtropical. The Tropic of Capricorn runs through the park. It has got closer connections with the tropical savannas of East Africa, so a lot of the bird species that come down as far as more or less as Kruger National Park. So the geography is important. Also very important, even though there's only one biome in the whole of the Kruger National Park, and that's savanna, that's represented in any meaningful tracts, it does contain a number of different habitats within the savanna biome. So we're looking at grasslands, woodlands of various different kinds, tall riparian woodlands, acacia woodlands, broadleaf woodlands. There are rocky, dry habitats. There's freshwater pans, seasonal pans. There are different habitats, and they obviously support collectively a rich avifauna. Another reason why the Kruger is so good for birds and for birders is the fact that the camps themselves, that are scattered throughout the park, these are the areas where we're allowed to get out of our vehicle and walk around, and these camps have got established gardens, and these attract a lot of birds. So, for example, the coral trees and fever trees that are within the camp boundaries are very good for birds, and the sheer number of bird species that can be seen on a walk around a camp is quite remarkable. Many of the camps overlook water. For example, there on screen you can see the waterhole at Bergendal on the left, and on the right is the Sabi River from Lower Sabi Camp. Now these camps allow for very easy birding, very relaxed birding, and the birds themselves are quite approachable. And that leads us to the third reason why Kruger is so good for birds, is that the birds are not hunted or persecuted in any way. by humans. So they've become very accustomed to the human presence. There's a constant human presence on the roads, within the camps. Okay, maybe not right now with the lockdown. I wonder what the birds are up to now. So these birds have become habituated to vehicles and to people and allow for very close access. And this, of course, allows us to get our cameras out and obtain fairly decent photographs of the birds. So those are probably the main reasons why the park is so good for birds. And then the last reason, which is an obvious one, is just the size of the park itself. So the Kruger Park is a shade under 2 million hectares in size and is big. So obviously a bigger park has more habitats, allows for more bird species. So it is the largest protected area in South Africa. And it is comparable in size to, slightly smaller than Israel or Wales or Slovenia. It is a global important bird and biodiversity area, or IBA. It qualifies as a global IBA. In other words, it is internationally important for threatened bird species. The park itself protects 11 globally threatened species in addition to 14 resident regionally threatened birds. So is the Kruger National Park important for birds? Yes. Is it important for large terrestrial raptors, terrestrial birds and raptors and threatened birds? The answer is also yes. So this is a critical park for many of our raptor species. The birds themselves, the park is home to just over 530 bird species. There is no real official list for Kruger. You will find many different figures thrown around. I did a quick count. I may have omitted some of the once-off rarities, but over time, over 530 bird species have been recorded from the park. And this includes vagrants, about 130 or so, as well as localized residents, about 40 species of birds that are very localized within Kruger National Park. 90% of all the Southern African bird orders are represented within Kruger, and 82% of the Southern African bird families are represented. So the obvious ones that are not in Kruger are the seabirds. So you can see the largest groups of birds occurring within Kruger are the diurnal raptors, about 57 species, and then we go down. So the warblers, the sticklers, etc., about 36, weavers and widowbirds and waxbills both on 18. Yeah. So I think some of those that are quite important to highlight are the cuckoos. So 13 species of cuckoo, that's quite impressive. And the other one that really sticks out to me is 11 of the 12 owl species within Southern Africa occur in the Kruger National Park. The one that doesn't is the Cape Eagle owl. So again, with kingfishers, we're only missing one kingfisher from the lowveld, and that's the mangrove. And contrary to popular belief, the lowveld is actually quite good for larks, with a total of 9 species having been recorded. Now, the habitats within Kruger support the birds. The habitats themselves are very dependent on the underlying geology. So the vegetation relies very much on the geology. There are other factors, of course. But so let's have a quick look at the geology, and that explains a lot of the bird distributions within the park itself. Most of the western half of the park consists of granite. This leads to a sandy soil. These sandy soils are leached and give rise to relatively unpalatable grasses, which we call the sauerveld. So the western half of Kruger mostly consists of sauerveld. Through the middle of the park is a very thin band of Eka shales. These shales support a greater species diversity of trees, taller trees, should I say. For example, in the north you find some very tall mapanis, and in the southern bit you find very tall acacia walwichis. The Eka shales separate the granites in the west with the basalts in the east. The eastern basalts give rise to quite shallow soils, but with a high clay content, which leads to what we would term the sweet veld. And that explains why the larger herds of ungulates, such as wildebeest, and buffalo occur predominantly in the eastern half of the park on those basalt soils. The Lobombo Hills, which form the border between South Africa and Mozambique, are formed from rhyolite, a very old rock. That's where a lot of our rocky woodlands occur. The gabbro is very similar to basalt in that it gives rise to sweet felt. And you'll see these gabbro intrusions into the granites. Often short grass, the antelope graze it fairly short. And then right up in the north, we have some sand deposits. So this is, folks, before the geologists jump up and down, this is a very simplified geological map. Up north, we have two kinds of sand deposits. In the west, Punta Maria and northwards is the eastern tip of the Soutpansberg, where a lot of gorges and rocky outcrops give rise to a sandy woodland, tall, deciduous, broadleaf woodland. And then in the northeast, so south of the Pafuri border post, is another sand deposit, and that's called the Nwambia sandveld. And this is a little bit of Mozambique that just creeps into the Kruger National Park. The vegetation is just like Mozambique, and there's some very restricted birds that only occur within that little area. All right, enough about the rocks. Let's start our birding journey. We're going to start in the south at the port of entry called the Malalan Gate, which probably has the best bridge in the park for water birds. This bridge is elevated above the Crocodile River and affords great views of a lot of different species of herons, sandpipers, storks, fish eagle, etc., etc. This particular stretch of river is influenced by slightly warmer water emanating from the Transvaal Sugar Board sugar mill. There's a stream that comes in through that hotel that you can see in the back there, and that stream brings in treated water, but it's slightly warmer than the water within the Crocodile River itself, and that leads to quite a healthy fish population. They like that warmer water, and of course all the fish-eating birds are coming to sit in this area. There are many other bridges within Kruger that are excellent for water birds. The Sabi River, of course, is quite famous for water bird populations. And of course, the Olifants, Letaba, Shingwetsi, and the Luvubu. Limpopo River supports a lot of different birds, but unfortunately, it doesn't flow throughout the year. So a lot of birds rely on the permanent water further south. Some of the more familiar birds that occur along the rivers are Goliath heron, the world's largest heron, and one of our largest storks called the saddle-billed stork. These are very prominent birds. Their sheer size alone catches the eye, and both birds will enjoy the fish that the rivers support. African fish eagle probably is a contender for the most photographed bird in Kruger. The other, of course, being the lilac-breasted roller. These birds are resident along the rivers and certainly contribute towards the soundtrack quite dramatically. The other bird whose call just reminds one of rivers is the common greenshank. It's got this very, very loud 3 or 4 syllabled call that is quite commonly heard in the summer months. One bird that does not have a particularly attractive call, and I'm sure those of you that have heard it will agree with me, is the white-crowned lapwing. A very, very noisy bird, very high-pitched call that is a feature of the rivers in the lowveld, and it is quite a range-restricted bird within South Africa. In fact, the Kruger is one of the few places that you can actually see this bird within South Africa. And it occurs along most of the larger rivers. It's particularly fond of the sandy river banks and islands. Two of the most sought-after birds or inhabitants of the rivers within Kruger are the Pell's fishing owl and the African finfoot. Both of these birds are resident within the park, but unfortunately not easy to see by the average tourist. If you're very lucky, you could perhaps flush one along some of the drives, and particularly on the Olifants River. But probably the best place to see the fishing owl is from the bridge over the Luvubu River in the evening. So the resident birds are often seen from the bridge. Unfortunately, the general public doesn't have access at night to the bridge, but that's probably the best place. That's where this photograph was taken. African finfoot is the best place is along the Sabi River. We sometimes get them on the Crocodile, and we very, very seldom get them on the Luvubu River. up north in the park, but certainly the Skukuza area is the best place in Kruger to find African finfoot, and if you're lucky you can even see it from Skukuza camp looking down onto the river. Coming in the south, Malalan area, you entering what we would call the mountain bushveld, and that is an introduction into the savanna habitats within Kruger. So we're going to have a look at some of the savanna birds. As we go further north, you enter some mixed knobthorn woodlands, lots of knobthorn trees, marula trees, and combretum or bush willow trees. As one heads further north again, we start encountering in the drier areas a lot of acacias or thorn trees, and then further north into the Mapani belt, the Mapani being the most common tree within Kruger. The most familiar birds within the savanna or the woodlands are the rattling cisticola, which in summer appears to be calling from virtually every second tree, and birds like the fork-tailed drongo. Other very common birds within the savanna woodlands are the magpie shrike, which occur in small family groups, very vocal birds, and white-browed scrub robin, again a very vocal bird, but not quite as easy to see. Family groups of red-billed buffalo weavers are scattered throughout the savannas, the woodland areas within Kruger, and are often located by their very large and untidy stick nests. Each of those domed nests contains many hundreds of twigs and sticks and can support 2 or maybe even 3 entrance holes into their nests. So this bird is obviously a communal nester, and when they're not breeding, they tend to scatter throughout Kruger. They're not quite as easy to find. Other common birds within the woodlands are the hornbills. There are 3 smaller hornbills that I'm sure all of you would have seen on a trip to the park, including the African grey, the southern yellow-billed, and the southern red-billed hornbill. These birds are at every picnic site, every camp, every border hole. The birds are often tame and will come and beg for some food scraps. Please don't feed them though. In the south of the park, around the Pretoria-Skop area, and then again right in the far north around Punda Maria, we get what we would call broadleaf woodland or deciduous broadleaf woodland, and these woodlands support a different group of birds, and you'd have to visit these 2 areas that I've mentioned to find some of these birds, or they are at least more common there than elsewhere. And they include some quite sought-after species such as the green-capped Eramomola and grey penduline tit. Both of these birds are very small, difficult to locate if they're not calling, and occur in small family groups. Yellow-fronted tinkerbirds are often heard and seen within the Pretoria-Skop camp, and that area is also particularly good for a very drab but interesting bird called the pale flycatcher. This bird has had 3 name changes in my short life. I think it went from mouse-coloured to pallid to pale. We're kind of giving the guy a complex. Slightly more colourful birds within these deciduous woodlands include Retz's helmet shrikes and red-headed weavers. There's a big colony of red-headed weaver at Numbi Gate. When you come into the entrance gate, just within the little staff village behind the reception. Some of the raptors that are more common in this particular kind of woodland are the dark chanting goshawk and African cuckoo hawk, and both birds can be seen on the loop roads around Pretoria-Skop. Heading further north, we enter some more arid areas, especially in the river valleys, and these support acacia trees or thorn trees, as they're commonly known as. And again, we get a different group of birds within these acacia woodlands, many of whom are more common outside the park in the sort of the Kalahari areas as we go westwards through South Africa. And this region supports a lot of seed-eating birds, colourful birds, violet-eared waxbills, firefinches, blue waxbills, as well as some specials such as the olive tree warbler, which is a summer migrant, particularly fond of acacias. The pan called lupan, the acacia wawichis in lupan area are very good for this particular bird. And another bird which tends to prefer the acacias and the drier woodlands is the very colourful Moriko sunbird. I mentioned earlier that burnt-necked Eramomola is an acacia specialist. Very noisy little birds, usually located by their very high-pitched trilling calls. And common scimitarbles is a bird that also prefers the taller acacia woodlands within Kruger, but not restricted to them. The Kruger Park technically doesn't support grasslands in terms of a biome, but there are large areas of the park that contain more grass than trees, especially in the southwest around Pretorius-Kop and on the basalt plains running from more or less Crocodile Bridge through to the Babalala area, so the length of the eastern part of the park. The birding within the grasslands can be really, really good. It is obviously quite seasonal. The best time would be January, February, when the grasses are at their highest and lushest, and the little seeps and depressions are wet, and it attracts a few interesting water birds. The largest grasslands within Kruger occur in the south. So these are what we would term slightly moister grasslands. It's a higher rainfall area. And as you go further north in the park, as the rainfall gets less and less, so we find the grasslands become more and more arid. So there's more arid species that favor the northern grasslands, such as double-banded sandgrass, for example, more common in the north, whereas some birds are more common in the south, for example, things like croaking cisticola and yellow-throated longclaw. So we're first going to have a look at the moist grasslands in the south, where we get possibly the most photographed bird within Kruger is the LBR, or lilac-breasted roller. It's quite neat to have such a colourful bird as one of the more common birds within the park. Some of the larger birds that are found in these open environments are Swainston's spurfowl and the sought-after secretary bird. As I mentioned, this bird is decreasing in reporting rate within Kruger, and probably due to the grasslands shrinking in size due to bush encroachment. The grasslands support seasonally large flocks of Amur falcons. Now, these falcons are migratory. They're coming from far north eastern Asia, and they occur in their hundreds within the Kruger. And it's quite common to see these birds on these big open grasslands where they are predominantly feeding on winged termite alates and other insects such as grasshoppers. The abundance of food within the grasslands attract large flocks of birds. So our biggest flocks within Kruger are found in the grasslands, and they include things like the wattled starlings, which are communal breeders. They'll breed when the season's just right. It doesn't really matter what month it is, as long as the conditions are good. And these birds occur in huge flocks in both the breeding and the non-breeding season. It's a nomadic bird, so it's difficult to predict exactly where. But central Kruger in some of the knobthorn savannas is probably a good place to look for them when they're breeding. The famous feathered locust, red-billed quelea, occur in the biggest flocks of all, and I'm quite happy to say that after many years of drought here in the lowveld, this year was a particularly good year for the seed-eating birds, such as the queleas. The park is covered in a lush swath of grass, and our grassland species, such as the queleas, have thrived this year. In fact, it's probably been a bit of a bumper year for them. Of course, all the food attracts raptors, and these open areas support some of the more interesting raptors within the park, including the two migrant eagles, steppe eagle and lesser spotted eagle, both of which can occur in very large flocks in the summer months, as well as some of the interesting harriers, such as the pallid and the montagues, that quarter over these open areas hunting for their prey. Some more colourful inhabitants of the grasslands or the more open areas include southern carmine bee-eaters and redback shrikes, both of which are non-breeding visitors to the Kruger Park, so are found only in the summer months. Coqui franklins are quite scarce within Kruger, but they do occur especially in the sort of more open areas, open grasslands. And of course, black-bellied bustard is a conspicuous bird, quite sought after by birders, not for its rarity status, but for that very interesting call. Whenever I see one, I try and stop and switch off the vehicle and try and listen for the birds to call. They've got this very interesting, I think it's been described as a champagne cork popping. Some of our rarer visitors to, or rarer inhabitants of the grasslands include harlequin quail, which occur in vast numbers in the summer months, but quite tricky to pin down and photograph or have a good view of. And of course the black cuckoo, one of the more sought after birds within Kruger in these open grassland habitats. This year was not as good for them as I was hoping, even though the conditions seemed perfect. But some years there are quite a few present. Quite an unpredictable bird. Moving on, the rocky outcrops within the park support a few birds, not that many as you would think, but there are a few birds that are restricted to the granite outcrops as well as the big sandstone cliffs up north. The Pretoriaskop Bergendal area is best. They're very accessible, the outcrops there. But some of the picnic sites on the Lebombos, such as the Nwanetsi picnic site, are also reasonably good to find some of these birds. One of the birds that is not necessarily easy to see because of its cryptic coloration and nocturnal habits is the freckled nightjar. This bird blends in so well in granite outcrops that it's often possible to walk just a few meters away from it and not see it at all. So these birds are often seen on night drives around Pretoriaskop, and where their barking or yapping calls can be heard as well. Now, if you look very carefully at the bird in the picture, you'll notice two fluffy little chicks lying in front of it. Other birds that are found in the rocky areas include black stork, striped pipit, which is a very localized bird within the park, and lazy cisticola. And as I mentioned, the Pretoriaskop area is best for these birds that prefer the rocky outcrops. Riverine forest or riparian forest is the next habitat we're going to have a look at. There is not much of it in Kruger, or in South Africa for that matter. The most well-developed riparian forest in the park occurs along the Luvubu and Limpopo rivers up north, and then the Sabi River in the south. These are the areas that support the best riverine forest species. Some of the more common ones found are also very colorful. Such as the purple-crested turaco and the white-browed robin chat, very vocal inhabitants of riparian forests within the park, and the tiny little collared sunbird, very easy to see this bird within, for example, Skukuza Camp, and then crowned hornbills. These birds prefer the dense vegetation of the riparian woodlands, riparian forests, and occur all along the Sabi River and other rivers further north. Of course, all these birds are preyed upon by something, and some of the inhabitants of the taller, denser vegetation include African goshawk and African barred owlet, both of these birds causing havoc with some of the smaller birds in the forests. Seasonal or temporary pans are scattered throughout the park, but most of them are situated within the basalt and the Eka shale areas. So the granite doesn't support fantastic pans. After heavy rain, there are a few, but the best pans within Kruger are on the clay soils. And these pans are mostly dry in the winter months, and it's in the summer months, or even the late summer months, when they really come into their own. And I find myself unable to drive past some of these pans. You just have to stop and have a look and see what you can find. Of the more common birds that occur on our seasonal pans include African jacana, which will only come in when the water lilies have developed, and knobbled ducks. So this is a seasonal bird within Kruger, occurs in the summer months, and then they're not particularly fussy, and they will occur on relatively small pans as well. Upping the rarity a little bit here, greater painted snipes are fairly common within Kruger. They occur every year as a breeding bird, but always a delight to find. Slightly rarer will be dwarf bitterns. These birds are also seasonal, and they utilize the temporary habitats that the pans produce. And most pans of a reasonable size, and I'm talking about anything from sort of the size of your lounge or living room and bigger, will have at least a pair of dwarf bitterns in the summer months. Not always easy to see, but they are generally around. Lesser moorhen is another bird that comes in when the conditions are right for them. So these temporary seasonally flooded grasslands. And as the pans develop, as they mature, the water lilies establish, and that's when we get things like African pygmy geese coming to visit. Also as a breeding visitor, and a very good place to find pygmy geese would be Liu Pan, which is situated just south of the picnic site called Chokwan. This is a very good pan, and when we have rain, supports excellent diversity of lesser moorhens, Allen's gallinus, so birds that like those seasonal habitats. Heading further north, we're getting into the arid grasslands. So these occur more or less from about Satara up northwards to Babalala, which is a picnic site south of Pundamaria Camp. The arid grasslands are one of my favorite birding habitats in Kruger. They don't necessarily support a huge diversity of birds, but this is where we get a lot of unusual birds. Now, the most conspicuous inhabitants, in terms of their size in these arid woodlands, are the ostrich and the Kori bustard. So these are the two biggest birds we have within Kruger. One being able to fly, and the other one obviously not. The big open plains are home to the biggest herds of game within the park, and that of course attracts a lot of the predators, which in turn attracts the vultures. So this is a really good area for vultures, for example, that white-headed vulture photographed there. And this is also a very good area for martial eagles. They like these open areas, they like the occasional big tree to breed in, and certainly the Satara area is a very good place for finding them. Some of the smaller birds that prefer these open arid areas are double-banded sandgrouse, usually occur in small flocks, and dusky lark, which is a non-breeding summer visitor, annual visitor to the park, and even though we can get them down as far south in the park as you can go, they are more common in the northern drier woodlands and grasslands. This area is also home to big flocks of chestnut-backed sparrowlarks and some of the birds that are probably more typical of the Kalahari environments, such as shaft-tailed and long-tailed paradise widers, and of course their hosts, the waxbills. Sometimes the conditions, such as on screen at the moment, and this is on the S90, which is one of the really, really good roads for finding them, when conditions are suitable, so in other words, in drought years, these plains can support some very unusual birds. And some of the more unusual ones that we have recorded are birds predominantly found in the Kalahari and the Karoo semi-deserts way to the west, and they include birds like lark-like bunting and even grey-backed sparrowlarks. So these plains to me are very interesting. I love scanning them for courses and for larks and for pipits. It's obviously not nice to have droughts, but it does increase the different sort of habitat of those arid grasslands. Heading further north again, both on the granites and on the basalts, we get into tall Mopani woodland. Now, for those of you that do not know, Mopani is a particular kind of tree in the legume family, which is super abundant in northern Kruger Park. In fact, it grows in monospecific stands. As far as the eye can see, it's just Mopani trees, which leads some people to call it, or nickname it, Morpain instead of Mopani. Mopani woodlands can be very hard work, especially when they are stunted, when they're small, stunted by the very shallow soils and low rainfall. But where they do develop into tall trees, for example, along some of the ephemeral drainage lines and in the Eka Shales east of Pundamaria Camp, they do actually hold some very special and important birds, locally important birds. African mourning doves are probably at their most highest abundance in the Mopani woodlands up north, and a drive out from some of the main camps up north, for example, like Shingwetsi, in the early mornings, you're bound to bump into a Vero's eagle owl, which does strike quite a pose. It's our largest owl within Kruger, and as you can see in the photograph there, it possesses huge talons, which it uses with great effect and catches quite large prey. Mopani woodlands, or the northern woodlands, are also home to the highest number of mosque swallows. These swallows prefer to breed in baobab trees, and there are a lot of baobabs in northern Kruger. We don't have many in the south at all. And things like Bennett's woodpecker, which is a woodpecker which is quite familiar to those that walk around the camps, for example, Shingwetsi or Satara camp. A very special inhabitant of our Mopani woodlands, the taller woodlands, is the Arnott's chat. Not an easy bird to find at the best of times. It has caused lots of strife amongst birders, unable to find it. So it's not a bird that always sits out in the open. It's not a bird that is in your face, and sometimes requires a little bit of hard work. But there are a number of Arnott's chats within Kruger. They're scattered throughout northern Kruger, and if you spend enough time in the Mopane, you're bound to find them. Two of the more colourful birds found in the tall Mopani woodlands include the grey hooded kingfisher and African golden oriole. Both are summer visitors to the park. The oriole is less predictable and is only seen a couple of times every year, but the grey-hooded kingfisher does actually breed in the Mopani woodlands in summer. The sandveld areas around the Punda Maria camp in far northern Kruger support some really, really exciting birds. Here at the eastern tip of the Soutpansberg mountain range, a lot of birds are restricted to these very tall and dense woodlands and hillsides clad in dense stands of Lobombo ironwood trees. Some of the more sought-after birds, or conspicuous birds there, include the eastern nicator, which is resident in the camp in Punda Maria, and yellow-bellied greenbull, which is a noisy inhabitant of those dense thickets. If you're very lucky, you'll bump into white-breasted cuckoo-shrike, for example, on the Mahoney Loop that runs around the camp of Punda Maria, and this is also the best part of Kruger to find Narina trogon. So west of the camp itself, on the Mahoney Loop, there are a few pockets of forest, and they hold Narina trogons. Not always very easy to see within Kruger. It is far more common outside of Kruger than within. So Kruger is not a great place for it, but a short drive out of Kruger into the escarpment forests, when the Narina trogon becomes a lot more common. Flying overhead, brown-necked parrots occur in small flocks, and they'll move around that whole northern Kruger area looking for their favorite food. These birds are the largest parrot within Kruger, and their size alone should avoid confusion with the much smaller brown-headed and Mayer's parrots. For a few years, we had a small flock of orange-winged patilias resident within Punda Maria camp, where they would come and drink from a small little bird bath. The birds haven't been seen there for quite a while now, but they must be somewhere. So this is the best part of Kruger to find these rarities. And southern Hyliota, one of the few places in South Africa where you can see this bird, is on that Punda Maria, the drive around Punda Maria called Mahoney Loop. You need to be pretty lucky to find it. It's not a very vocal bird. It's a very small bird, and it tends to keep up to the top of the canopy. So it's not a bird we see often, but it is probably one of the better places to find it, is that Punda Maria area. Now we're talking about Punda Maria, so it means we've already reached northern Kruger, and this is now the best part of the whole of the park for birds. So the northern tip of Kruger, between the Levubu and the Limpopo rivers, supports 90% of all the birds ever recorded within the Kruger National Park. So I think it's 27,000 hectares. It's known as Makuleke, a contractual park. This is a park that is a bit of Kruger that is managed by SANParks, but belongs to an adjacent community called the Makuleke. This tip of Kruger is the birding hotspot of the whole park. So over 400 or about 450 bird species have been seen within that sort of 27,000 hectares. The Levubu River is a very good spot for birds. One may park your car on the bridge and get out of your vehicle, and I have spent countless hours standing on that bridge looking for birds. The rivers also support the largest areas of what we call fever tree forests within Kruger National Park, especially along the eastern part of the Levubu, east towards Crook's Corner, and then again on the Limpopo River as well. Now, these very tall trees are very, very good for birds. Unfortunately, they're so tall, it's actually not always easiest birding, but they do support a lot of different bird species. Both the rivers, the Levubu and the Limpopo rivers, support seasonal pans on their floodplains. These pans are not accessible to the general public, unfortunately, mostly. But there are a few concession camps up in the north where one can get to these access to these pans, and these are incredible forwarder birds. In fact, the Limpopo River floodplain pans have been designated as a Ramsar wetland site. In other words, they are globally important for supporting populations of water birds, and the water birds are spectacular when the pans have water. Another habitat found in the far northern part, or the Pafuri part of the Kruger National Park, is the Nwambia sandveld. This is a little bit of Mozambique that I mentioned that just creeps into South Africa. Unfortunately, this area is not accessible to birders, but this area does support three birds which are almost impossible to see elsewhere in Kruger, and they are the fawn-coloured lark, Rudza palis, and pink-throated twinspot. And I'm sure if we had to spend enough time in there, we'll discover some additional species as well. And I'm quite sure with patience and with a bit of luck, one day we're going to find Kruger's first African broadbill in that vegetation type. Far northern Kruger also supports some of the most well-developed Mopani woodlands. And it supports two very big gorges. The one is the Levubu Gorge, which is almost inaccessible. And then the other more famous one is Lana Gorge. Lana Gorge is only accessible from the northern bank, from vehicle access, and unfortunately only to residents of or visitors to the lodges up there. So the northern tip of Kruger supports so many different bird species because it supports so many different habitats within a very, very small area. Let's have a look at the birds. Barrow's eagle breeds in the gorges up in northern Kruger. It's the only part of the park where they actually breed. And they're fairly easy to see, especially from a tourist road perspective. The best place to find them would be on the Nyala Drive, which heads west from the Levubu Bridge. Another bird that breeds up in the riparian forests in northern Kruger is a crowned eagle. That's a young bird that was photographed at Crook's Corner. It's not an easy bird in Kruger, but the Limpopo and the Levubu riparian forests are the best place to find them. Another very interesting resident raptor up north is the Dickinson's kestrel. This bird is a member of the falcon family, but unlike the larger falcons, this bird catches most of its prey on the ground, hence the term kestrel, which is used for the smaller members of the falcon family. Dickinson's kestrels are not altogether reliable in terms of their sightings, but they are resident in northern Kruger, and the Makuleke area is very good for them. Another bird that is almost completely restricted in terms of its South African distribution to the very tall Mopani woodlands up in that northern tip of the park is the racket-tailed roller. There are quite a few pairs in the northern part of the park, north of the Levubu Bridge, and this is also one of the birds that can be seen from the main tourist tarred road that runs up to Pafuri Gate. Now, very interestingly, and the only place I know of in the whole of Africa where they do this is that there are a few pairs of these racket-tailed rollers that actually nest within those very, very tall fever tree forests. Otherwise, they prefer broadleaf woodland, tall broadleaf woodland, for example, the Mopanis, but there are a few pairs that annually they breed in the fever tree forest, which is quite interesting. Some of the small inhabitants of the riparian areas up north include the black-throated wattle-eye. Again, this is the best place in Kruger National Park to see them. And the southern yellow white-eye, or African yellow white-eye. This is the only place in Kruger you do get them. Two common birds up north include the Meaves starling and the tropical booboo. Both of these birds occur only, or in South Africa at least, in the Limpopo Valley, and are quite unique to that sort of more tropical or subtropical woodlands up further north. We don't get them in southern and central Kruger at all. But when you're up there, it's the common starling and the common boo-boo. Two inhabitants of the dense thickets along the rivers up north include the crested guinea fowl, or Bob Marleys, as they are often referred to. And then probably the most difficult bird to see in Kruger is the river warbler. I say this because I've tried a number of times to see this guy, and I've only had success once. It's an annual visitor to Kruger. Kruger's perhaps not the best place to look for them. Probably north of Pretoria would be. But we hear them calling. Unfortunately, we're not allowed to leave our vehicles. So it's difficult to chase after these birds, but those thickets along the Luvubu, Shingwetsi rivers, Limpopo River are the best place to look for these birds within Kruger. The arid areas adjacent to the large rivers are also home to another fairly restricted bird in terms of its South African distribution. That's the three-banded courser. It's a resident bird in northern Kruger. Again, slightly tricky to find from the tourist roads, but quite reliable when you book into one of the game lodges up there, the private lodges. The guides kind of know where these guys hang out. Very vocal at night. We often hear them at night, and I know last year in March I even heard them calling from Shingwetsi camp, so that's a lot more accessible. Standing on the bridge over the Luvubu River, as one is allowed to, is a great way to find three of the less common swifts within Kruger, and they are the African black swift, the Burm's spinetail, and the mottled spinetail. Black swifts breed at Lana Gorge. It's one of the few areas in Kruger that they do breed, and they're regularly seen foraging overhead. The two spinetails are quite uncommon within Kruger, but the bridge is a really, really good place to see them, where they occur with the far more common little swifts. A little swift nest under the bridge and occur there's a big colony there, and if you carefully scan those flocks of little swifts, you'll find the Burm's spinetail. The mottled is trickier to find because it kind of looks a little bit like a little swift, but with practice you'll find them. The northern tip of Kruger is also very exciting from a sub-regional perspective, in that it attracts occasional visitors from further west, the arid thornveld areas further west. For example, chestnut-vented warblers or chestnut-vented titbabbler. There's a record of Kalahari scrub robin, and then scaly-feathered weaver or scaly-feathered finch have actually nested in northern Kruger, and occasionally we get, a lucky few, get to see a crimson-breasted shrike. So not a bird, these are not birds that are typically thought of as Kruger birds, but they are an example of some of the interesting records that come into the Kruger Park, presumably down the larger river valleys. All right, everyone, we've traveled the length of Kruger. We've shown you a few pictures of some of the common residents and a few of the rare residents and a few of the rare migrants. It's impossible to show you all 530 species in one evening, but I sincerely hope that with our access issues into the Kruger Park at the moment, I sincerely hope that you've enjoyed the talk tonight and that it has been nostalgic in some ways, but also that it's made you keen and eager to actually go into the park again as soon as we're allowed to. Thanks for listening. Herman is going to talk about the BirdPro app now, and then we'll do some question time afterwards.
Thank you, Duncan, and thanks to all the people that have joined us tonight. I'm going to give you a quick overview of BirdPro. I know we're running out of time, so I'll make it as succinct as possible. BirdPro is a new app that was launched last year. The Kruger Park version was launched about middle of the year, and the full South African one towards the end of the year. The app comes in 3 flavors. So the first would be the evaluation version, which is a free version which contains 100 common birds. You can download it and you can try it out. And then when you're ready, you can upgrade to either the Kruger Park version or the South African version. Tonight, I'm going to focus on the Kruger Park version. So let's have a look at what BirdPro can offer. It contains the basic information that you would expect from any bird app. It's got the list of birds. You can scroll up and down. You can go into the details of a specific bird where you'll find the images, you'll find the distribution map, the information about the bird, calls, and where you can add sightings as well. Let's start with the images. We've tried to include as many images as possible in this app. The BirdPro South Africa contains almost 7,000 images now. So what we did is we tried to include images from the front, from the back, from the side, males, females, images, and also where there are different races, we also try to include all of those. One quite unique feature that we've got is that you can open a view of the eggs and it'll show you the actual size of the eggs on your screen. Another feature which is quite handy, especially when you get to similar birds, is there are some extended captions which gives you guidelines of what to look out for to distinguish this bird from other similar birds. So let's look at the distribution map. We've created quite a sophisticated algorithm to convert the SAB data into distribution maps for this app. What we did is we took the data, and where there are a lot of atlasing activity, like in the Kruger Park that we heard now, we know that the data that we've got is quite accurate. So it means that the maps are almost more granular, they're more detailed in those places. And in places where there's very little atlasing activity, it would actually spread out the distribution, because if a bird is seen in a specific place, there's a big possibility that this bird also occurs in the surrounding areas. But due to the low atlasing activity, that would not necessarily be recorded as such. We've also got the ability to show you the distribution as it changes throughout the year, which is quite unique. You can also see the vagrants, and your sightings are also included on the maps. But let's move on to the texts. BirdPro contains quite comprehensive texts about all the birds. The basic information is there, like the length, key features, habits, etc. But what makes it special is that there are extended text sections that are written by some of the most renowned birders in South Africa, people like Warwick Tarbert and Fancy Peacock, and many others. There were actually 13 authors that contributed to the texts in BirdPro. The texts come from the highly acclaimed book, The Ultimate Companion, which was published a few years back, and I would really encourage you to go and check it out. It's probably one of the most beautiful books that I've seen on the birds of South Africa. What's nice about the text, it is quite personal, and it's almost a storytelling, and there are many personal anecdotes in there. It is quite comprehensive, but it's a nice read. It's an easy read. Something else that's quite important to note is that the Kruger Park version does not always have the same text as the South African version. So there are specific references to where some species are found in the Kruger Park, which is contained in the Kruger Park text. And then we get to the calls. We've got over 1,700 calls in BirdPro. We've got all the variations that we could lay our hands on. We've got them separated so that you can listen to them individually. And we've got extended descriptions which tells you where they were recorded, which is quite important for different local variations of songs. And then lastly, we get to sightings. This is where you can see your sightings that you've already logged, but you can also add a sighting. And here you can add a trip that you want to save the sighting against. It defaults to the current date and the current location, but you can change that. Let's select a different location. And you can add notes, add photographs, and a bit later I'll talk about the syncing of sightings. But let's get to some of the more advanced features that BirdPro has on offer. And one of them is a smart search function. This is where you would go to identify a bird. So the first thing that I normally do is I use a location. And because we've got these accurate distribution maps, the location is a very good filter for birds at a specific location. So I'm just going to select a location in the Kruger. Unfortunately, I'm not there. I'm in lockdown here in Joburg. And then you would go to the search categories, and you can now search by shape and type, by size, colors, where seen, etc. So let's assume we saw a bird that was wading in the water and it had black and white feathers. So you're presented with a list of birds where the most probable fit to your selections are at the top, and lower down there are some other possibilities, but they're not as good a fit to your selection as the ones at the top. So it gives you a kind of a weighting, and it's pretty easy to see that the black and white birds are at the top, and the rest of the birds they do contain black and white, but they're not necessarily only black and white, are lower down on the list. So these would be your most probable matches to your search criteria. Now you can go into the details, and you can also remove birds from the list. There's also a special section in the search function to help you identify difficult groups of birds. For example, the all-brown raptors, the LBJs, and the nightjars here. This is a section where you can drill down and find the bird that you're looking for quite easily. It is quite comprehensive and quite specific to brown eagles, which is very pertinent in the Kruger National Park. Some of the other features is that you can change your primary and secondary language. In terms of primary language, we've got Afrikaans and English, French, German, scientific, etc. But on the secondary language, we've got a lot more languages. Most of the indigenous languages, as well as most of the European languages, are there. In the list grouping, you can change the way that you want to group your birds. Also, you can group your sightings. You can sync sightings with a website, which I'll talk about now. And then this Activate product is to change the active version of your app from Kruger to South Africa or vice versa. But let's look at sightings. We've got some quite exciting new functionality here, which has not been launched yet. We're planning to launch this in the next week or so. In the first place, you can filter your sightings. I've just filtered it by a trip that we did in the Kruger. And there are 147 birds that we identified in this trip. The nice thing is now you can sync your sightings with a website, and I've already done that, so I'm just going to visit the website to show you. I'm logged in and I'm going to my sightings, and this will give you now more filtering capabilities that are not in the app itself, where you can select your trip. You can say which app. By the way, we've got two other apps out now, a tree app and a dragonfly app, and they will all be displayed on this same list, so you can actually combine trips between apps, which is quite exciting. You're presented with a map with all your sightings on it. You can see there's all my pins, and I can zoom into them. I can click on a specific sighting, and it'll show me which bird it is. Then there's also a list at the bottom. You can share this with somebody, so you can send them an email and they will be able to open this website with your list that you saw on this trip. Okay folks, that's about it from me. Thanks for listening. Thanks to BirdLife especially for giving us this opportunity to show you a bit more about BirdPro. And I hope to hear from you. You are welcome to send me an email, info@birdproapp.com. We're going to go over to the questions and answers section now. Just give us a minute.
Great, thank you so very much for that, guys. Wow, I am having extreme nostalgic moments right now, having gone through those two presentations. So thank you, Duncan, and thank you, Herman. I'm sure all of our guests have really enjoyed that too, and I can see that by all the comments that are coming through. So before we jump into questions, I please just want to remind everybody that there is a short survey that you will be directed to when this webinar closes. Please take 2 minutes just to give us some feedback. We really do appreciate it. And of course, you will see the Quicket QR code coming up on your screen every so often while we do these questions. There it is. Please consider donating towards these webinars. They do cost us money to run, and every little bit does help us keep them going. We've really enjoyed putting this series together for you, and we'd like to continue doing that. So please do consider sending through a donation. You can either go through that QR code, or you can follow the website down at the bottom there, quicket.co.za. Next week, we've got Dr. Hanneline Smith-Robinson talking to us. She's going to be giving an overview of BirdLife South Africa's conservation work. So please do tune into that. You can see some of the intricate and really exciting things that BirdLife South Africa is getting up to. And of course, as you know, we're getting into our question and answer session now. So those of you that haven't done the Q&A session before, we have a new feature where you can upvote questions. So if you go into that Q&A box, You can pick your favorite questions that you'd like us to send through to the panelists, and we will do our best to get them through to them. Now, we had a question from Penny Abbott on Facebook. Duncan, I'm going to start you off with this one. And Penny was saying that during the Kruger National Park Challenge last year, which BirdLife ran, they observed pygmy geese on the Olifants River. Is that quite an unusual sighting?
I wouldn't say unusual, it's a great sighting. I don't think pygmies are too common on the olifants. We do see them on some of the larger impoundments, for example, on the Letaba River and the Shingwetsi. Well, the impoundment on the Shingwetsi is no more. I think it was called, ironically, Kaniduet Dam. But I know I've seen pygmies at Letaba. I think that's Engelhard Dam. So yes, if the water's still and the food is present, so the water lilies, then they could occur. But I think it's still a great sighting.
Awesome. Yeah, definitely a really great species to connect with in the park. Then Herman, this one's for you. Amanda's asking whether she could import BirdLasser data into your BirdPro app.
It's a very good question. We've had quite a few requests for that, and we've actually started looking at it now. I hope in the next version, or actually on the website, that we'll be able to import it there, and then you can sync it with your app. So hopefully in the next month or so we'll have that.
Fantastic. It's so exciting to see all these new apps coming online for our bird watching community. So it'll be wonderful if we can find some synergies there. Eileen is asking how many pulls approximately are thought to be resident in Kruger. Duncan, I'm not sure if you have a rough estimate for this.
I don't, but Mr. Kruger Park Pals Fishing Owl does have the he does have the answer. So I've managed to quickly message John Davies, who's a resident in the lowveld, and he says that pretty much between 15 and 20 pairs within the whole of Kruger, but they're not evenly distributed. There are concentrations of pals, particularly along the Olifants and the Liverpool rivers.
Yeah, so not high numbers at all, and it's certainly a very special bird to connect with in the park if you are lucky enough to see it. Thanks for doing some research in the background there. Now, we have an anonymous question asking what your favorite route is in the park. If you had a single day, where would you go?
I would have to sneak off the tourist road and then drive the Limpopo River floodplain. I think when the pans are really good, I don't think they can be touched. But from a tourist road perspective, I think one of my favorite birding roads, just for general water birds, as well as bushveld birds, would be along the Sabi River in the south.
Yeah, definitely a very special part of the park, that Sabi River stretch, and very high abundance of both game and birds. So well worth a visit. Now, David's asking how far south in Kruger the pennant wing nightjar occurs.
Okay, within Kruger it regularly occurs up at Punta Maria in the sandveld areas. I think we've counted 6 on a night drive before. Further south than that, they're very difficult to connect with. They are seen, I would say, annually around Pretorius Skop, between Pretorius Skop and Numbi Gate. Also in the similar sort of a habitat type, tall deciduous broadleaf woodland. But there are records of pennant wings in the same habitat type just south of Afsal, so between Afsal and Malalan. That's probably about the furthest south in the park where they have been seen, but not regular. And obviously a tricky area to get to at night.
Certainly, yes. You are very lucky if you connect with that bird away from Punda. We've got a question from Ada. This one's for Herman. She's asking on the BirdPro app, is it possible to zoom in on pictures of the birds?
Yes. Yeah, you can open the image and you can zoom in, no problem. If you click on the image, it actually opens a zoom view for you.
Great, that's awesome. Then I see we've got a question from John Herman, also asking with regards to the BirdPro app. On the Apple iOS App Store, he's saying that there's an app called BirdPro, but there's no mention of the Kruger app or a free app. Do you want to just differentiate that for him, please?
Yeah. They're all in one app, so they're all called BirdPro. So you download the free version, and then in the app you can actually buy the other data sets. So you can buy the Kruger data set or the South African data set, and we'll add more data sets as we go along. So they're all in one app, and so there's only one app on the store, and it's called BirdPro.
Great. Then we've got a question from Jan. Duncan, I think this one will be for you. Why does one sometimes find, he's put you big herds, but we would think big flocks, 15 more of ostriches, and other times you'll only find a single bird or a pair of birds?
I think it's got to do with what they're doing at the time. So if they're nesting, then there may only be a few birds together in one spot. But if they're not nesting and they're walking around, you can get up, 20, 25 ostrich together in Kruger. You can get more together in the Kalahari, but within Kruger, I don't think I've seen more than 20 to 25. But it just depends on what they're currently doing at the specific time of year.
Great. Then Eileen's asking with regard to pied crows, are they becoming a nuisance and are we seeing more of them in the park?
I would say yes, with a very small little asterisk. I've seen them ripping open rubbish bags in some of the camps, like Mapani camp, but I think they're still pretty rare within Kruger. They're abundant just outside. So obviously there's a large population, and they'll forage into Kruger. But I think that at the moment they're pretty much restricted to some of the camps, and I don't think they're a huge problem yet, but they could become. But we must also understand it is a native bird. So it's not like an alien invasive species, like, for example, common myna. So it isn't technically classified as a pest in the same category.
Yeah, definitely. And BirdLife South Africa is actually in the process of looking at holding a pied crow workshop where we can start to talk around some of the issues associated with pied crows and how we deal with an indigenous species. So we'll definitely keep everyone posted on the outcomes of that going forward. Now, Matthew's asking, during his birding in Kruger, he's yet to see a purple-crested turako on the Shingwetsi River. Is there a reason for this?
Yes, it's quite simply down to food. The Limpopo, Levubu, and Sabi and Crocodile rivers support a wider diversity of riparian forest tree species, so a lot more figs especially, whereas those rivers in central Kruger, they may have some of those trees present, but the actual structure of the riparian forest isn't dense enough, isn't big enough to support permanent populations. You'll probably find records of them, but they're not nearly as common there as the very well-developed, less flood-damaged riparian woodlands or forests, for example, along the Sabi River, where they are quite common.
Brilliant, thanks. And then voters asking whether we should be worried about common miners spreading into Kruger. I know there have been some concerning sightings of these birds showing up in some of the less populated areas recently. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, Duncan.
Yeah, I'm seeing them 10, 15, 20 kilometers from camps, seeing them riding on buffalo like a wattle starling would do. They've almost now adapting to a natural sort of lifestyle within parts of the park. Actually, a little anecdote about miners. I was walking with students along the Levubu River, upstream of the bridge, and we flashed a Pell's fishing owl, and we were enjoying the sighting obviously a lot. And the very next sighting we had, the very next bird sighting, was a pair of common miners. I wonder if that isn't some form of dubious record to see Pell's and a miner within a minute of each other. But they really are in all the different habitats now within Kruger. The Bird Atlas project can map the spread annually, the annual spread of miners within the park, which is why we would like people to submit their Atlas data for the park, so we can spread things like this. But they're all over. They're from the top to the bottom. Should we be worried? I guess so. Yeah. What can we do about it? I don't think there's terribly much we can.
Very concerning indeed, and we worry that future invasive species that we can still control are not necessarily getting that control at the moment. So hopefully the miner won't be a bad tale to follow.
Yeah, there are bigger alien invasive species in the park, bigger threats, and that would be more in terms of vegetation than the miners.
Definitely, yeah, for sure. Thanks, Duncan. Great anecdotes there. Elise, we've taken note of your comment that you'd like some Afrikaans names as well. We will try and build that in future. We do know that we do host Duolingo viewership. So we will try and incorporate that. Thank you for that comment. Vilma's asking how often flamingo has been spotted in Kruger, Duncan.
As a foraging species, not regularly. I think most sightings are of single birds or very small groups that are perhaps stopping over at one of the impoundments, traveling between the coast, the Mozambique coast, where there are an abundance of pans, and perhaps the high-flight pans or Christian's mere. So in terms of actual foraging habitat, there's very little of it. So most of the time, if we're seeing a flamingo, it's perhaps one or two, or a flock flying high over the park.
Okay, brilliant. Then Herman, this one's for you from Stuart Galloway. He's asking whether you'd need to buy both Kruger and South African versions of the app to get the benefit of the Kruger text.
No, you can just buy the South African and then you'll have the Kruger Park version available. And then you can switch back and forwards between the two.
Fantastic. And then Sven's also asking Herman on that, how many licenses, so could you run it on your phone and your iPad, and would you need to buy double in order to do that?
No, as long you can share it on as many devices as you want, as long as they're all registered with the same email address. The one caveat is that you cannot share it between Android and Apple devices. They're different platforms. So all Apple devices with the same email address you can share with, or all Android devices with the same email address.
Great, thanks. Then Verity is asking, which is more likely to be seen on the Punda Maria flycatcher trail in early March 2020? Would it be juvenile red-chested cuckoo or adult African cuckoo? And she's saying that it was drizzling when they saw it and they didn't get great definitive ID points. Duncan, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
On the flycatcher trail, probably more likely red-chested cuckoo. It's quite a dense sort of vegetation on that slope, which is far more typical of a red-chested. African cuckoos tend to be on the sort of flatter, more sort of open woodland areas. So I would say more likely to be a red-chested.
Great, thanks. And then Justin's asking, how common are winter migrants? He's got a blue mantle-crested flycatcher, Cape Baddis, etc. And how common are long-crested eagle within the park?
Those winter migrants are quite exciting, especially along the Sabi River, where we've had interesting records. For example, grey cuckoo shrike, Cape Canary, even white-starred robin in the Sabi River, and in the winter months. So if you had to draw a line from Skukuza Camp due west onto the escarpment where these birds are resident, it's a very short distance. And if there's inclement weather on the escarpment, so if Dahlstrom's frozen and there's a cold weather pattern on the escarpment, we find some of these birds moving down, especially down the river valleys. They're quite exciting birds to get, but not easy to see them, and you don't see them terribly often, but we do get them occasionally.
Fantastic. And talking of birds not easy to see, Simon Johnson's asking, where would you recommend is the best place to connect with red-chested flufftail in Kruger?
Next question, please. I've only recorded the flufftail 2 or 3 times in Kruger, and they were all at the same place. And that's one of the seep wetlands near Pretoria-Scorp. And none of them were visuals. You just hear the birds calling, and that would be in a very wet year. Yeah. So like the Trogon, Kruger's not the best place for the flufftail. I can think of many other places where they're reasonably common, but most of the time difficult to see. So Pretoria-Scorp's the only place I've actually had red-chested.
Sure. Awesome. And then Ari's got one referring to your Turning Kruger Green project. They're asking, did you aim to get good seasonal coverage for the virgin pentad?
Absolutely. And it would have been very nice to visit all these pentads in the summer months where we can get big species lists and even find the odd interesting vagrant. But no, we really did try. Peter Lawson, who was coordinating the project, he would target specific pentads and then organize the trips out. And we really tried to cover the pentad seasonally, so which is why we did some of these Mapani shrub-felt pentads in the winter where we got fairly low species lists.
Brilliant.
Otherwise, there would be a bias. So we try to eliminate that.
No, absolutely, and really well done. What an incredible piece of work, and the data that came from that is absolutely fantastic, and that publication is really a testament to that. So well done to you and the team. I'm very, very green, as the Kruger is now, with envy that you guys got to go and do that. Mark's just commenting here, Mark Cornier, is saying that he's had pennant-winged nightjar on the Nkambeni concession near Nimby Gate. So that is quite far south for the species, and great to see that they are down there as well.
Mark has submitted the atlas record and the photograph of the birds.
Brilliant.
And they have, so they should be on the database.
Awesome.
No, he's not the only guy, but yeah, there were quite a few guys that were lucky to connect with the bird there.
Definitely, yes, yeah. Great, so I don't see any more questions coming through at the moment. I see we just got a question about our YouTube. The presentation will go up around lunchtime tomorrow afternoon, everyone. So please just keep an eye on our social media feeds. You can also go onto our Conservation Conversations website, which is www.birdlife.org.za/BLSA-conversations, and you'll be able to find the links to the recordings at the bottom of that web page. We really appreciate everyone coming on tonight. I think this was a record-breaking webinar series for us. So to those of you who weren't able to join us in the actual Zoom room itself and had to jump over to Facebook, sorry for the inconvenience there, but our license is limited to 500 viewers. But we really do appreciate the support, and thank you to the over 270 odd of you that watched us live on Facebook as well. We really, really do appreciate the support. Please tune in next week. Hanleen will be giving an awesome presentation on BirdLife's work. And please make sure that if you are enjoying these webinars, you consider supporting us through that QR code. Duncan and Herman, thank you both so much for your time and effort. That was an outstanding presentation, and I think everybody is feeling very list to get back to the bush now. So thank you so much for letting us escape this lockdown for an hour. We really do appreciate both of your times.
Thank you, Melissa,
Thank you.
and well done, Herman, as well. Yes, we're looking forward to getting back in the park. I see my wife's hidden my bucky keys away. So I can't sneak out tomorrow morning and try and climb in through the fence. But yeah, folks, we see you in Kruger.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you both so much. Thanks, everybody. Take care out there. Keep safe in lockdown, and make sure that you keep your eyes outside and on the skies and enjoy those birds. We'll chat to you all next week. Keep safe, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.